I have a rather peculiar way of communicating my messages, but don't worry, there's substance behind it. In 12 years of risk management, I was responsible for building, together with the Australian Stock Exchange, the guide for risk management in SMEs, and we've traveled all over the country trying to share those messages. As a head of risk for one of the biggest private equity companies in Russia, I was responsible and I had to be involved in implementing risk management across 95 portfolio companies, all with diverse backgrounds and cultures. Also, as a lecturer in a number of large MBA business schools, I deal with the executives from SMEs on a day-to-day basis, and I see how much their view of risk management differs from large corporations. I also do know what risk management in large corporations is because I was responsible for writing some of the global PwC risk methodology. So I'll try to combine that into some sort of fun presentation that we can share today. So today I'll talk about 5 key fundamental differences, how risk management in an SME different from a large corporation, and what we both as representatives of large corporations must do about it and what SMEs can do about it as well. So the reason number 1, I feel, or the reality, it's not really a reason, like it's not a bad thing, it's just the reality is that SME appetite for risk is quite different from you would expect. They are faced with a lot of rapid decision making. They have to make decisions under a lot of uncertainty, sometimes with not a lot of supporting information because there's simply not enough time or competence or resources, but I'll talk about that in the next few slides. The decision making is pretty rapid, and sometimes the opportunity cost or the cost of losing a particular decision or a contract for SME is quite high. So an SME would, from time to time, take on more risk than it can really absorb. Now, high risk appetite is not actually good or bad. But as Australian Stock Exchange, for example, was saying to all the companies listed or on the exchange, is that having a high risk appetite is fine, but you need to either support that with the proper risk management process or be transparent that your appetite for risk is high and let the counterparties, the stakeholders and the investors know. Now, as large corporations know for sure, is if SMEs were disclosing that their appetite for risk is super high, that would probably make them not win a lot of the contracts that they are winning. So we would expect them to then have good risk management practices. But this is reality number 2. Reality number 2 is that decision-making and business processes are not often structured and formalized within SMEs. You would expect risk management to be an integral part of decision-making, planning, budgeting, bidding, procurement, but the reality is many of those processes where you're supposed to integrate risk management into are not formalized and documented in SMEs, which again is not good or bad, it's just part of our reality. And the reason for that is because SMEs heavily rely on talent, which is great. There's a lot of talented people that are capable of making decisions. And that, to me, is the reality number 3. SMEs have amazing talent, people who are capable of making decisions and taking the responsibility for the outcomes. But unfortunately, as I know for a fact from teaching a lot of those executives, many of them do not have the risk management competencies to support their decision-making on a day-to-day basis. And it's not just that they don't know what ISO 31000 is. That's not the bad part. The bad part is that risk is actually, as far as I believe, risk management is actually, it goes against human nature. There are all those different cognitive biases that build into our brains that prevent people without proper tools making well-balanced, risk-adjusted decisions, unfortunately. So you need some sort of support and process around that. So to me, talent is like an Achilles feet in SMEs. It provides a lot of value. It's like the glue for growth. But when it comes to risk management, it's probably the worst enemy because without proper analysis of uncertainty in the decision making, more often than not, the risks would be absorbed without understanding the full implications. So the fourth reality for me is that most of the time, even though people understand risk and some processes may be in place, there is simply not enough resources to actually mitigate or do something about those risks. And that's just a reality that we in large corporations need to be mindful of and remember when we build a relationship with the SME. And the only reason I'm telling you all this is that because, of course, I will end up with some sort of solution on how can we approach that. And yet we'll pick up and start talking more about some of those things as well. So that's number 4. And the fifth, and probably the last one for today, even though there are dozens of reasons, but I've singled out 5. The fifth one for me is that SMEs are often forced to absorb risks across the whole value chain. SMEs have their own suppliers, and most of the time, or often, those suppliers are large corporations that have pretty strict terms and are not willing to share risks. So SMEs have to absorb a lot of risks down the value chain, and SMEs are always forced to absorb risks up the value chain with the clients that only trade on certain terms. And we need to be very mindful about that. So to me, coming sort of to a conclusion on what can we do, stakeholders obviously can't continue to ignore this. And not only do we need to price the risks correctly in dealing with SMEs, as yet we'll talk a lot more about in the next section, they also need to, large corporations also need to really think about promoting healthy risk management across SMEs. And we in the private equity world, we know that our success and our financial performance depends on how well our portfolio companies, who are 99% of the time SMEs, depends on how well they are capable of identifying and dealing with potential risks. So we spend a lot of effort on doing 4 things. And those 4 things are, first of all, since we understand that the appetite for risk across SMEs is usually significantly higher than what we would expect, we actually work with them to set that expectation, that there are certain risks that we find unacceptable, that there are certain rules where the senior management within the SME has to disclose a particular risk and shouldn't make that decision on their own. For example, all the foreign exchange risks and all the hedging decisions, we try to escalate that up because we know that most of the SMEs don't have sufficient competencies to do hedging, to do a proper hedging strategy. So we try to bring that up and add our experience to the discussion to help them mitigate the strategies, maybe at the portfolio level, not necessarily at the portfolio level, at the portfolio company level. So setting the expectation is one of the fundamental things. I mean, you can't really expect an SME to suddenly start being conscious about the need to be proactive about risk management. It's unlikely to happen. For most of the MBA students that I deal with, it is a surprise to them that risk management is actually included as one of the subjects in the MBA program, and most of them don't understand the implication and the significance of the knowledge that they get through that subject, and their perception changes significantly after they went through the education. But I mean, there's just a small number of the population that do get the benefit of learning about risk management. So number 1, it's our job to set the expectation properly. Number 2 and 3 is all about providing some sort of facilitation methodology support. Both in providing tools and templates, we have a packet that we can give to any of our portfolio companies that has the right risk management policies, the templates, the report examples, and everything else that you would expect from an SME risk management framework. Just like with an Australian Stock Exchange, we did a guide called Risk Management and SME, and at the back there were different examples and templates on how to physically do it, because it's actually super simple. So not only do we provide templates, we do a lot of effort, we put a lot of effort into training. Because we understand that depending on how well SMEs manage risk, that will impact our financial performance. We actually invest our time and money into both providing face-to-face, on-site training and to doing a lot of distant courses for the SME management and executives. So we do a lot of training to make sure that competency is built up. And we don't teach them about the risk management standards, surprisingly, but we teach them about what the job of a CEO should look like when he is faced with the decisions that involve uncertainty and how he can integrate risk. One of the funny courses that we're doing, we've got a distant online training program where you have to pick which company you would be the CEO for. And then after you've studied some theory, you're faced with the decision to identify risks. But you don't just identify risks, you have to play a game where you have 5 executives, but you can only interview 3, and you need to identify 10 risks, but you can only ask 3 questions to each executive. And you kind of have to build that competency to get the information from the team. And the same with the risk assessment. We give the training participants a lot of information, just like in real life. Most of it is not true. There are a lot of inbuilt cognitive biases, and they have to choose and pick which is the correct information relevant for risk analysis. And the final thing that we try to do is we understand that risk management is about changing the way how decisions are made. So we try to keep it super simple for most of the risks across most of the SMEs. Some of the more advanced companies, we use different methodologies like Monte Carlo modeling and scenario analysis. But for others, we use some really, really basic stuff, because we understand that keeping it simple is probably one of the most fundamental things when you're just trying to build the culture. So this is pretty much everything I wanted to share with you today. The questions will be at the end of both sessions. I do encourage you to ask me questions. If you don't ask me them today, ask them to me on LinkedIn. I'm available for comments, obviously. But anyway, if you have any questions for me, write them down and we will have a Q&A session at the very end. And I will now hand over the stage to Jaap. Thank you.